Hey Soul Family, and welcome back to How to Create a Sacred Space. This is an actual really important thing that I always do whenever I move into a new place. The reason being that when we create sacred spaces or an altar offering, that particular area holds a vibration. And so if you look at traditions where they have meditation mats or meditation pillows or beads, the reason why they would have these is because in the repetition of using these objects, they would hold the vibration of the work that you were doing in that meditation, so that way, whenever you move or whenever you use it, it would hold that frequency. So if you're somebody that's just started out, maybe you'll like to go get yourself a nice mat or a nice cushion and use that same mat and same cushion every time whenever you sit to meditate or create ritual. That way, the portal of energy will always be in that object, and wherever you put that in your space, it will also vibrate in that frequency. So it's a really awesome way to lift up the energy in your house. But for this, I wanted to share with you a few of the tips as to what I would be putting in my sacred space. Obviously, you can create your own sacred space, and I highly recommend that you intuit and feel into whatever it is that you want. But these are some tips that I would like to use. The first thing is I actually put a leather, silk, or fur base. Now, I talk about this in my introduction to crystal courses, and the reason being is these are the only fibers, natural fibers, that cannot be penetrated by detrimental energy. Linen as well, so if you're somebody that's against any kind of animal products, then I would suggest linen. Now, the first things first, finding something that, if you can, has a pattern, maybe like the flower of life. These types of sacred patterns hold vibrations. I'm not going to go into it, but I will perhaps make a video about it so that way you understand a little bit more about why those vibrations exist in these particular patterns. But for this example, I've got a piece of leather that has been embossed with a almost flower of life kind of symbol. So I'm just going to create a little altar space. So I'm going to start with putting my piece of leather down. Now, this is also really good if you're living in apartments, because then the energy underneath you will not rise up into your altar space. So this is something else that if you're living in spaces where you're around a lot of people, you really want to create a vibrational field that blocks or creates boundaries of protection, so that way your energy is constantly being held by this vibration. So sacred space, sacred space, sacred space. I can't recommend enough all of the things that I give as tips. These are the ways that I hold my vibration. I am a very busy lady. I have a young girl that's just turning 1, and I have a lot of big projects, and I've come into this world with big ideas, big plans, and constantly having to show up. And so these are the things that I do in order to make myself almost invincible in holding my energy, because they create a vibration that helps to give back to me. So it's almost like self-love. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was some kind of essential oils. Now, I would highly recommend using frankincense, and the reason why frankincense is the vibration that I would be working with is it holds the color of green and orange. Now, in pranic healing, you learn about the color vibrations, and in the Vesica Institute, they also teach about the vibrations through the biogeometry course, which holds all the different layers of energy and color and what they represent. I'm going to make this really simple. Frankincense helps to open the third eye, and it's why they used it in rituals as well as in the church to clear. So I would just be using a little bit of frankincense, dabbing it on the third eye, and having that on my altar space so that way I could go to it whenever I needed. The second thing I would be looking at is crystals. Now, crystals are the only, let's say, physicalization of highly let's say spiritual organs that exist in higher planes of existence. So in layman terms, if you could imagine a spirit of an angel existing on this physical plane, its vibration is so high it could not match this physical plane yet. We are working on that. So crystals, because of the way that they've been created over thousands of years, hold these frequencies of the higher elemental beings in their form. Now, I talk about this in crystals for protection, crystals for bringing in health, wealth, and abundance, and a lot of other crystal classes that I have on how to use these vibrations as alchemical remedies. Now, crystals are only in their beneficial vibration if they're clean and they haven't been tampered with. So that means they haven't been heat treated, they haven't been color dyed, or they haven't been radiated. Now, unfortunately, that is happening a lot. So the only way that you can really tell is actually if you use the tools from biogeometry. Once again, if you're lucky, I might go through a couple of these techniques, or at least offer you products that you know have not been heat treated or contaminated. So if you want to work with their vibration, you know you'll be completely safe. The first crystal that I wanted to talk about is selenite. Now, the reason I love selenite is it looks like a pillar of light, which is exactly what it does. So in gridding, it's really good for connecting other crystals in the grid. But for the work with your altar, it's going to help to anchor the vibration of light into your sacred space. If you can find a way to hold it up like this, winning. If you can't, then at least have it in a way so that it's pointing at you when you're sitting at your altar. Now, if you are somebody that loves selenite, the other reason that I have chosen selenite is that it is really good for detoxing your system. So if you're somebody that's going through a purification process, in layman terms, letting go of a lot of the old shit, that could be old friendships, it could be addictions, it could be sugar, alcohol, any of that stuff, then selenite is your best friend. Personally, I love working with it early in the morning when I wake up, and if I feel that real intense grogginess, just working with your breath and breathing in the energy of the selenite will help to purify the auric field. So this is a great crystal to work with when you are going through transformation, but it's also a great crystal to have on your altar space. The other crystal I would also recommend is apophyllite. Apophyllite really helps to connect with the higher beings. Funny story, I was working, because I had worked as a tarot reader, still do, but not as often. And when I was working with my cards and I connect into the higher beings of the person I'm working with or myself, one day I was finding it really hard to anchor the connection. And so when I asked my guides what to do, they told me to actually grab some apophyllite and some pink tourmaline. But the apophyllite really helps to hold those higher frequencies and tap into those higher vibrations. So it's very, very strong and will help to anchor any of the energies that you're tapping into. So grab yourself some apophyllite. Highly recommend checking out Mineralism. They're one of my favorite stores for crystals, and they ethically find their crystals. We don't realize how much of a black market there is in crystals, and that a lot of the miners are just pulling them out of the earth willy-nilly without actually asking for their permission for them to be birthed, or at least doing it in a manner that's ethical, like not using child labor. Mineralism checks in with all of that stuff, so I highly recommend their store and their products. The next crystal that I would recommend is this beautiful bluey color called celestite. So The celestite also works with the angelic realm. This one is very fragile, so just so you know, anything that ends with "ite" has a softer composition. So selenite, celestite, they will actually dissolve in water. Now, personally, I actually don't use any water. If anything, I clean maybe my darkest stones with some vodka and salt water, only because that's like the most ultimate cleaning process. I'll talk about that in one of my classes if you're curious. But the selenite and the celestite will dissolve in water. I actually use a crystal that I have instructed to clear any of the vibrations of the crystal that is holding any matrix of lower vibrations that's harmful for you. So it not only cleanses, it activates and it amplifies the crystals. So all of my crystals are super highly charged, and I can give a demonstration another time just so that you understand how powerful they are. I'm not a liar. So yeah, these charged Lemurian quartz points I use to actually clean my crystals. I'll be offering for sale as well. It's just a way that you don't have to buy Palo Santo, you don't have to buy sage, because let's be honest, these things are not going to last for everybody. And so we're going to have to find ways to clean our crystals. That doesn't mean we have to deforest a whole Palo Santo tree plantation in order for us to cleanse ourselves. Celestite connects into the angelic realm. So this is another crystal that I'd highly recommend. Now, these crystals, you might want to have this one pointing at you, and you might want to have either of these crystals in your hands while you're connecting in, perfectly fine, or you might like to just acknowledge their presence. Now, this is an amazing trick that I learned from biogeometry, but I knew already, but biogeometry scientifically proves that when we find the energy or acknowledge the energy, especially when we find power spots, and this is a whole other topic to go down the rabbit hole with, has to do with Egypt, the pyramids, how they used to connect into the creator and bring through beings from higher dimensions. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about power spots. Anyway, so when we are using the actual crystal and we acknowledge its presence and we give the presence of its, being here to assist us, it actually activates the crystal. So you being in awareness of its presence activates the crystals. And I talk about all of this and how to talk to crystals, because you can actually talk to them. They do talk, they talk back. But you have to be working not in this physical presence, you have to be working in your etheric body. And that, unfortunately, is something they just don't teach at school. It is something that I teach though, so if you are interested in learning how to talk to crystals, then that's something you might want to look into. Anyway, moving along. The next thing that I would be placing into my sacred space is an object, obviously, that you identify with as peaceful, harmonious, something to connect into spirit. Obviously, this statue of Ganesh, who is a representation of abundance. Highly recommend that if you're somebody that is interested in working with the deities, that you do your research. And when you work with these deities, acknowledge them and humbly respect them through unconditional love, that they only come to you through unconditional love. The reason being that there is false light. Now, this is another huge topic that I will have to discuss in another episode, because it is so rampant at the moment and something that we all have to be very wary of. But just for the sake of this, because I am coming through to explain this sacred space, we are working with the deities through unconditional love only, and bring their energy vibration through from that trust, faith, and awareness that they are coming through. Okay, the next thing that you might like to work with is some this is frankincense, but you might want to work with some incense. The reason being why we work with scented elements is because these activate the senses, and we want to activate the sight, the smell, the taste, the touch. And so when we bring in smells and we're working with these smells, they help to not only bring us into alignment, but the smell itself can also bring vibrational alchemy into play, but they also help to activate our sensory perception. When I talk about sensory perception, I'm talking about the beyond the physical, beyond this physical plane. We smell, we taste, we touch. These aren't things that are necessarily object of physicalization. They are sensations, and these sensations, when we work with them on subtle levels, can activate things that we can then perceive through higher dimensions. So if you are channeling and then all of a sudden you smell roses, you might actually be bringing through Mary, Mother of God. Or there might be somebody that's bringing you roses or reminding you to buy roses. This actually happens. It's not very uncommon. So just so you're aware, this is why we bring the essential oils and the incense into our sacred space. Which then leads me to my Tibetan singing bowl, which I bought in Tibet and was created by 9 different elementals, metals, and once again bringing in sound to bring in that inner peace, as well as work with the energy of sound. So we might not necessarily be donging it the whole time, but it might be something that we start our meditation with, and we're also bringing in these elements of metal, if we wish, into our sacred space. Now, the next thing that I would also be working with to go with our smelling and our sounding is touch. Now, when we look at the mala beads, the 108 actually represents the doors or the channels to the heart. The actual bead itself was from the tree that Buddha sat under when he was achieving enlightenment. But I actually talk about this to my students, is that the acupressure point for the pineal gland is located right in here on your thumb. And so what we're supposed to do with the actual mala beads is not using our index finger, because the index finger, and I talk about this in Crystals for Jewelry, is a very powerful finger. And so when we point with conviction and anger, we can actually hurt somebody. And it's something that I don't want to give you guys as an impression, but this finger is almost like a dictating finger. So we can command with this finger. So be mindful that what are you doing when you're using specific gestures with our hands, because they have intentions. So we work with these 2 fingers, and the way that you work with the mala beads is you roll the bead onto this point within the finger. And the actual beads themselves, if you look at them really closely, they have a texture to them. So they're kind of, I wouldn't say spiky, but they definitely have a texture. And so you would be rolling this bead onto your thumb. You would be doing your mantra, and this used to be one of my favorite practices and highly recommend it. Staring into a mandala and doing, soft focus, and doing my rosary beads, maybe Om Mani Padme Hum to open up my third eye, Om Namah Shivaya to remove obstacles. These mantras are very powerful. They've been used for centuries, so they have a collective consciousness, they have a vibrational field, they have ability to become alive when we work with them consciously and accept them into our life. So working with this vibration, we're activating the third eye. We are using our mala beads with our mantra, maybe staring at a beautiful mandala that's above our altar, soft focus, and we do it 108 times. So Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. So we're pulling the beads down to the next one, to the next one. We do it 108 times, and there we have our activation of our mala beads. So like I was saying to you prior, you might have a meditation cushion, you might have a meditation mat. If you have meditation mala beads, then you can take these with you after you've done your meditation, after you've done your mantras, and hold that frequency in your being. Whether you wear it, whether you put it over you, it's going to hold that vibration, and the more repetitive you are with it, the stronger it will become. So this is something I would also have on my sacred space. Now, you cannot go without a candle. Now, the reason why I would be using a candle, and the reason I tell people to have candles, is we bring in the element of fire. And fire is also another element that, like crystals, can hold celestial immortals into the physical plane. So that's why Punjabs in the Krishna faith are so powerful. And I remember when I actually went to a Hare Krishna Puja, and we were blessing with the fire, and I was doing my meditation, and all of a sudden my body started to freeze in this immense, tremendous energy that was coming through my body, and it was like coming through the soles of my feet from the earth up through my body, and it got to about here, and I started freaking out and going, oh my God, what's happening? And had to like literally, my hands went into a claw, had to like try to bring them down to the earth, and just started releasing the energy. But what was happening was a Kundalini rising. And had that Kundalini gone all the way up, I would have had a Kundalini rising all the way through my chakras. A lot of people are doing Kundalini work, but the other thing that people don't realize is with the activation of the Kundalini energy, it's going through all of the chakras with immense power. And that power, if our chakras are not clean, can also shoot that vibration through our being. Now, I don't want to scare people or put people off from doing Kundalini work, but definitely do your research with your teachers, because this is something you have to be aware of, that when you're working with energy, you need to know that people are professional and know what they're doing, because you are at the mercy of this practice. And so Kundalini activating is very, very powerful. And so you want to be doing processes of cleansing and purification in order for you to make sure that if you do have a Kundalini rising, your energy is going to be clear. So at the time, I wasn't very sure what was going on, so I chose not to. I have had lots of Kundalini activation since, especially when I went to Ratu Bagus in Bali and did the shaking meditation, had amazing, crazy activation there. But at that point, I'd been doing many years of practice, and so the sweetness of these activations were empowering and brought through a lot of spiritual enlightenment. So anyway, going back to the candle, the actual flame holds the vibration of light, and it also helps to bring the elemental beings that are working with these higher vibrations into this physical realm, so that way they can help with your work too. Now, you might have a particular tarot deck that you like. I personally work with the Tarot Way and the Psychic Tarot when I work with my clients or myself. And so I might be working with a crystal and have my deck out, and then choosing 1 or 2 or 3 cards as inspiration for the day, for the week, whichever way you are working with these cards. I do teach how to work with tarot, and like I was saying with my Apophyllite, how to actually connect into these higher beings. So working with Apophyllite when you're choosing your cards, or Celestite, really great. So I would have them somewhere close by. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is have a journal, because if you have those moments of enlightenment after you come back from that sweet meditation, you might want to write that down and allow yourself to be present to what it is that you have just experienced. Not necessarily something that you have to do, but it's a beautiful way to keep in mind what it is that you're bringing through and have that close by for you as well. Now, the last and not least, actually, there's one more after this, but the quartz crystal. Now this beautiful quartz crystal is humongous, and size when it comes to crystals only matters depending on whether they're activated or not. Now this crystal I have as one of my pieces that's guarding my space, but I would be putting this in my altar space so that every time I am working and connecting into these higher vibrations, I ask this crystal to hold that vibration and to almost impregnate itself with that frequency, so that way it will hold a memory of what it was that I went through. And if I had some amazing epiphany, or if I had some huge awakening, or if I had some amazing activation or healing, I can take this with me anywhere and tap into that vibration at any place, anytime. Same goes when I'm working with clients, is I have 7 clear quartz points, and I use them every time I'm working with clients for healing, and so they hold the vibration of previous healings that I've done, so that way if there's something that a person needs that I've done before, those crystals are activated to clear that vibration or work with healing that vibration or activating that person, or clearing. And I do a lot of grids with clear quartz, and this is something that I highly recommend if you are a practitioner or somebody that does ritual, is to work with clear quartz grids, so that way when you bring that grid, it always has that vibration in its field, and it just amplifies and amplifies and amplifies. So yeah, having your clear quartz crystal in your space doesn't have to be this big, by the way. This is just a magnificent piece that wanted to be seen. So these are all the introduction to sacred space elements I would be using, but the one thing that I also tell all of my students and friends that buy crystals is that when you're done with your altar or your sacred space, you will really want to cover it at night. And the reason being, when you have highly activated crystals and you're sleeping and you're astral traveling and leaving your body, if these crystals are highly activated and they are even in the next room, or when I talk about activated crystals being highly activated, we're talking about thousands of kilometers activated. So it will not matter if you are on the other side of the house and your altar is in your meditation room. They will still come and affect you. And in saying that, you might need that vibration. But if you are finding you cannot sleep, and this is especially the case in full moon, new moon energies when the energy is quite high, I highly recommend you get a silk cloth. I'm going to turn my candle off. And you cover your crystals at night, so that way they do not keep you from having a restful sleep. If you have a lot of crystals, then my next advice would be to get a beautiful cabinet. You can get them from IKEA, I think they're $100, and you put all your crystals in your cabinet and you buy some silk and you cover them all up, and that's your go-to for your crystals. Or you create a beautiful altar with all your crystals and you cover them up. And if you do not believe me on how much they will change your sleep, I dare you to do it and tell me if it hasn't done anything for you. Now, I've had people come to me and say, oh my God, I had the best sleep last night. I've been working with crystals for 15 years and had no idea that this is something that was happening. Because this kind of information doesn't really circulate as much as it should. And so that's why I'm taking it upon myself to give you guys this insight. So that would be my last tip. And I hope you enjoyed this channel. And if you did, please like it, because there is much goodness to come and many more beautiful, brilliant, fantastic, high power activations on their way. So I hope this finds you well. Blessing.